Hey everyone, Noah here. I run this channel, President Foxman, and today I just wanted to talk a little bit about credentials. It's been a conversation I've heard a little bit around the internet, and just wanted to kind of put my thoughts to it and process it with everyone else. I think the thesis I want to lay out first is that credentials are about trust. They're not much else beyond that. That in the end, everything is about relationships.
Sam's point here is really important because Sam makes the point that credentials develop because you have relationships that are beyond the face-to-face. And credentials have developed in many different forms throughout history. For example, in the ancient world, if you were going to people traveling across the world to a group of people that were somehow connected to the people that you were from, you would come with what today we call a letter of recommendation, which would say, you don't know this guy, but you know me, and I say he's okay, so you can listen to him and you can talk to him. When you get to modern institutions like the Christian Reformed Church, I hold a credential with the denomination, and that means that I achieved certain educational goals, I was examined by certain bodies within the institution.
And I think Paul here is... well, let me move this out of the way. I think Paul here is getting to what I'm thinking of too. Of, in the end, we're all just kind of trusting. But fundamentally, credentials are a trust of the institution that gives the credential. For example, he mentions the Christian Reformed Church. Why do I trust in the approval that the Christian Reformed Church puts on Paul? Well, that's all based off of how much I trust the institution itself. And this doesn't just hold for institutions, but we use institutions as a way to democratize or to expand the room for trust beyond a single person. Right, a single person that might have some authority is can have a little bit of trust, right? We think about presidential figures. We have people running for office, but when there's a party behind them, there's a certain level of authority that they're given above that. There's an approval saying, actually, a large group of people who might know what they're talking about says that this person is someone that we consider that you should vote for. I think it's good to stick with schooling as well. It's a great example. We look at a law degree. Somebody goes to Harvard for 4 years. There's a very high threshold to even get into Harvard, right? Then beyond that, they have to go through, do all their classes, and by the end of it, because of how selective this process is, there is a high level of authority given to the organization of Harvard to be able to evaluate the candidates that go through their program and to say whether or not they deserve the credential which represents their expertise in the field. All of this is based off of perception, right? In the end, it's a trust that I trust Harvard's integrity as an institution, and as soon as I doubt that, as soon as I think somebody is buying their degree, right, that there's somebody who just happened to be able to sneak in, pay off some administrator, any credential that comes from them now has a tinge of doubt, right? My lawyer went to Harvard, but was he one of the ones who paid for his degree directly, or did he also work for it? Now we can consider another situation as an interesting mirror point. What if there was a man who, instead of going to Harvard, he goes to this random guy in his backyard, and this random guy in his backyard puts together a curriculum that is extremely well done, more intense than Harvard, and he teaches people in his backyard better than Harvard could ever do. It seems very unlikely, but he hands out his credential, and it's drawn in crayon on a piece of paper on the back of a menu from a local restaurant, and this guy carries it around. No one's going to take it seriously, even though he's done all the work, right? He does have the expertise, the authority which gave him the credential like Paul is saying, right? Like this is the same thing as a letter that's given by somebody in another town to basically say this person's good. How do we discern this, right? Because it's unlikely, but in the end, it is trust. And when we're living in an era where institutions are losing trust really fast, we don't know what to trust or who to. It's good to evaluate other kind of things to consider when we're talking about credentials as well. Like, again, who do we trust? We consider testimony as being a huge one, right? Like organizations, in a sense, a credential is a testimony to an individual's expertise or an organization's expertise. I think of also auditing, right? There's a accreditation process for colleges that decide whether or not they are accurately testing their students well enough to be able to discern whether or not they have expertise. So we have a organization that gives credentials to an organization that gives credentials. And so we have this kind of several layers of like trying to like, do I trust this group? Well, do I trust the group that gave them the approval? And sometimes it's easier just to trust your neighbor, right? Or your friends. You know, my friends got hit by a car, right? And I ask him, like, you know, how did your lawyer do in trying to deal with this issue? And he tells me, well, my lawyer was able to get me a pretty large settlement. Well, to me, like, no matter what his credential is, if he was a horrible student, as long as he can practice law, and it seems like he has a good track record, I might be convinced to go with him, even though he might not have the formalized paperwork. I mean, he would have to a certain extent, but not to have the highest of the high record. I might trust the guy that, you know, I have some sort of quasi-personal experience, which is odd, right? What is that? In the end, a lot of this is personal. If I have a friend, Chad, who's a tiler, and he spends his days, that's what he does. He goes into bathrooms and tiles the walls, and he does it really well, and that's what he knows, and he's an expert in it. Now, if I want to tile the walls of my bathroom, and I trust Chad, I would go to him first. Even though there might be a, you know, very successful company that does it, that has people with potentially more experience running it in tiling. But there's something about knowing the character of the person who is your friend, who knows about a specific subject. I would go to them first. So what's going on here? I think this comes back to a doubt of institutions, right? I've heard of countless stories of surgeons who, you know, were drunk on the job, or mechanics who owned companies, but they were drunk on the job, and they ruined actually my dad's car. That was something that actually happened. But you know, surgeons who messed something up. They left an instrument inside of the body. But then you hear stories about nurses who don't have as much of a credential, but they're able to notice things that, you know, doctors who are supposed to know everything, they catch something that no one else catches. And so there's this gap that we keep experiencing between what the credential says people should know and what people actually know, and people who have credentials who don't meet that standard, and people who don't have credentials who far surpass the standard. What way do we kind of bridge this gap? Like, what are we actually looking for? First, I want to make a point that I am not saying I don't think credentials are important. I think they're vastly important, and they provide a simplifying role, right? Because there is an intensive process to kind of discern these things. But I don't know, going to a university, they do their job. They are going to teach you the thing that, hopefully, 99% of the time, they will teach you what you need to know. I'm a computer science student, and I trust that everybody around me knows computer science, but sometimes credentials are considered outside of their realm of relevance. This is another major issue. particularly with computer science. Computer science seems to be looked at by people outside of it as the like smart persons, or the degree, or the really cool thing to know, and somehow think that computer scientists have some sort of extra insight on the world that no one else has, which disturbs me when I hear stuff like in my class where we learned how to create software to better benefit humankind. My teacher compared the human brain and the human mind itself to a computer, and drawing such connections to make it seem like they're basically the same thing. And that bothered me beyond belief, because the little bit I do know about the human brain is that it is not like a computer. Though it often is compared to a computer, it does not have RAM, right? And so to oversimplify a human like that in itself is an anti-human move, in my humble opinion, as a computer scientist who you should trust. And the question is, how do we resolve this credential issue? And I think in the end is that credentials are a good shorthand, right? I would trust a doctor with a degree more than I would trust, Joe down the street who's selling medicine out of his truck. Even if I think he's a really good guy, I wouldn't trust him first. There is something to results. What are the fruits of this activity, or whatever they're doing? And I think that's what I was getting at with the lawyer. You can have all the knowledge about law, and you can have a wonderful degree, but if you can't lawyer well, if you can't win cases, if you can't treat your client with respect, no one's going to want to work with you. And why would I select you, right? If a mechanic is going to rip me off, even though they might do a really good job, I don't want to. I don't know. I don't want their service. I think this is what we come back to, is that in the end, above everything else, it's the fruits. That's how we discern between authorities and between credentials. But I'd love to hear what you all think. If there's something I missed, please let me know. But thank you all for tuning in, and I hope to see you at least next Saturday.